The wind howled through the broken remnants of downtown, sending dust swirling across abandoned streets. Once a thriving city, it now lay in ruins, a decaying testament to the chaos that had overtaken America. The world had fallen into a darkness that seemed impossible to escape. The undead roamed freely, ravenous and relentless. It wasn't just a pandemic anymore, it was the end of civilization. The outbreak had been sudden. 1 minute, there were whispers of strange infections in remote areas, and the next, it spread like wildfire. It didn't take long before the first reports of the dead ones surfaced, horrifying creatures, once human, now mindless and driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh. It didn't matter who or what they attacked, they tore through the population with brutal efficiency. The government failed, the military collapsed, and humanity found itself in an all-out war for survival. But there was one thing the world hadn't anticipated. The human spirit was not easily broken. Against all odds, some survivors had managed to hold out. Small pockets of resistance, spread across the country, held on to hope. Among them was a group known simply as the Last Stand. In a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of what had once been Los Angeles, a group of survivors sat around a makeshift table. Their faces were grim, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights, but there was fire in their hearts. They knew their world was on the brink of extinction. The zombies were evolving, becoming smarter, more coordinated. It was only a matter of time before they overran everything. At the head of the table stood Captain Jake Harrison, a former military officer and the reluctant leader of the Last Stand. His face was rough, marked by scars both visible and invisible, and his eyes carried the weight of countless decisions that had cost lives. He surveyed the room, engineers, medics, former law enforcement, and a handful of civilians who had found their way into the group, all united by a common goal: to survive. But survival wasn't enough anymore. They needed to end this. "We've been fighting for years now," Jake began, his voice rough from too many nights spent yelling orders. "We've learned that the zombies are evolving. They're not just mindless animals anymore. They're learning. They're hunting us, and they're getting better at it. We need to strike first, hit them where it hurts." A woman across from him, Dr. Emily Carter, a biologist who had joined the group after losing her family to the outbreak, leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concern. "You're right. But the biggest problem isn't just the zombies anymore. The virus is changing. It's adapting, and it's mutating the undead in ways we don't fully understand. We've seen signs of organized movements, some kind of intelligence among them." Jake nodded grimly. "That's exactly why we need to take action. The world's only hope lies in one thing now: stopping the source. If we can find the root of this outbreak, we might have a chance to reverse it." But there was no easy answer. The cities were no longer safe, and the government's last-ditch attempts at a cure had failed. The zombies had destroyed infrastructure, leaving only small pockets of survivors fighting tooth and nail to hold onto what little was left of the old world. Yet among the survivors, there were whispers of a possible sanctuary, a place untouched by the infection, a possible cure hidden in the heart of the devastation. "I've heard rumors," said Eli Thompson, a former police officer who had lost his wife and son to the infection, his voice tight with emotion. "Rumors of a safe zone, somewhere in the Rockies, far away from the cities. They say it's untouched by the infection, that there's a cure. But no one knows for sure." The room fell silent. Hope. That was the rarest commodity left in the world. The thought of a safe zone seemed almost too good to be true. But Jake knew better than to let doubts cloud their judgment. Hope was the only thing keeping them alive, even if it was just a faint light in the distance. "We don't have time to wait for miracles," Jake said, his voice steady. "We strike now, before the zombies evolve any further. We'll head toward the Rockies. It's a long shot, but it's the best chance we've got." The room was filled with murmurs of agreement. The plan was dangerous, reckless even, but it was their only option. As the survivors began to prepare for the journey, the weight of the mission hung heavy in the air. They had no idea what awaited them out there in the wilds of post-apocalyptic America. But one thing was clear: the world had changed forever. and the final war for humanity's survival was about to begin. Outside, the sounds of distant growls and shuffling feet echoed through the night, signaling that the enemy was already on the move. The fight for the future had begun. The morning light filtered weakly through the cracks in the warehouse walls, casting long shadows over the survivors as they gathered their gear. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and the faint remnants of a world long forgotten. Captain Jake Harrison stood at the front, running his fingers over the map sprawled across the table. It was a map of what had once been a vibrant country, now reduced to a series of smudged lines and faded symbols. "We leave in an hour," Jake announced, his voice low and commanding. "We move quickly and quietly. We're not just fighting zombies anymore. We're fighting to save what's left of humanity." The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone had heard the rumors about the supposed sanctuary in the Rockies, but none of them truly knew what lay ahead. They didn't have the luxury of time to question every detail. All they could do was trust in the survival skills that had kept them alive until now. Trust in each other. Dr. Emily Carter was already checking her medical supplies. She had long since abandoned the hope of finding a cure for the infected. The truth was they were running out of options. Her latest research had shown that the mutation of the virus wasn't just accelerating. It was evolving beyond recognition. If they didn't find the source soon, there might be no stopping the infection at all. "We're going to need more than just luck to make it," she muttered to herself, looking up only when she felt Jake's eyes on her. His gaze was steady, but there was a flicker of concern behind it. He knew the stakes. They all did. Eli Thompson, the former cop, was checking his weapons. His hands were steady, even as his thoughts betrayed him. He hadn't forgotten the horrors he'd witnessed, the brutality of the zombies and the devastation they caused. But it wasn't just the zombies that haunted him. It was the thought of what had become of his family. A part of him feared that even if they reached the safe zone, it would be too late. That no sanctuary existed. That the world was beyond saving. "We move fast," Jake said, his voice breaking through Eli's thoughts. "No detours. No distractions. We stick together, and we make it to the Rockies." The group gathered their few belongings, water, food, makeshift weapons, and made their way out of the warehouse. The world outside was eerily silent, save for the occasional distant growl or the rustling of the wind. The dead had learned to be quiet, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next meal. It was as if the very world had been reshaped in their image, dark, oppressive, and unforgiving. As they moved through the wreckage of the city, they stayed close, moving in pairs to watch each other's backs. They had learned the hard way that even the smallest mistake could cost them everything. The streets, once bustling with life, were now littered with abandoned vehicles, empty storefronts, and the remnants of a society that had crumbled overnight. Their journey through the decimated city was uneventful at first. The air was thick with the stench of decay, but they hadn't encountered any zombies yet. That fact, however, only served to heighten their sense of unease. The zombies had learned to be patient, biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jake led the group through a maze of collapsed buildings, their once pristine exteriors now reduced to rubble. They were headed toward the outskirts of a city, where the last remnants of humanity had retreated into makeshift shelters, hoping to outrun the nightmare that had overtaken the world. Suddenly, a low growl broke the silence, sending a wave of panic through the group. They froze. "Stay still," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes scanned the dark alleys ahead. His hand instinctively reached for the pistol at his side. It wasn't long before the first zombie appeared, a lone figure stumbling out from the shadows. Its skin was a sickly gray, its eyes empty and glazed over. The stench of death clung to it like a shroud. It wasn't one of the newly mutated zombies, just a standard, mindless creature. But even one of these could spell disaster if it alerted a horde. Jake gestured for the group to stay low and keep moving. They had no choice but to slip past the zombie as quietly as possible. They were too close to the outskirts to risk a confrontation. The zombie sniffed the air and staggered closer, its feet dragging across the ground. The survivors held their breath, their hearts pounding in their chests. The air was thick with tension. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. Then, just as the creature was within arm's reach, it let out a rasping breath and turned, sniffing the air in another direction. It wandered off into the shadows, leaving the group with a collective exhale of relief. But they didn't have much time. Every step they took brought them closer to the unknown, and the further they ventured, the more dangerous the path became. They had no idea what awaited them in the wilderness, but they couldn't afford to turn back now. As they moved forward, the landscape began to change. The city's ruins gave way to stretches of open, desolate land. They were leaving the remnants of the old world behind, heading into the heart of the chaos. "Stay sharp," Jake ordered, his voice cutting through the mounting tension. The real fight's only just beginning. And as the survivors continued their journey into the unknown, they couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse than they could imagine was waiting just beyond the horizon. The landscape ahead seemed endless, vast fields of overgrown grass and cracked roads leading to nowhere. The faint scent of decaying plants mixed with the stifling smell of death that hung in the air like an oppressive fog. The survivors had left the ruined city far behind, but it didn't feel like they had escaped the nightmare. It was just waiting to catch up with them. As they pressed on, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows over the barren land. The day had been uneventful, but every survivor knew that the real danger wasn't always visible. It was the silence, the eerie quiet that seemed to swallow the world whole, making each step feel like a trap. The zombies had grown smarter, and so had the survivors. They knew they were never truly alone. "We need to rest," Jake said, his voice rough. He signaled to the group to stop and find cover. The decision wasn't easy. Every moment spent out in the open was a risk. The land around them offered no shelter, no protection. The survivors quickly set up a perimeter, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. Dr. Emily Carter checked her map once again. "If we keep moving at this pace, we'll reach the foothills of the Rockies by dawn. But we can't stay out here too long. There's a storm brewing." Jake glanced at the sky, his face hardening. The dark clouds swirling overhead confirmed Emily's concern. A storm could hide any number of threats. It would make traveling dangerous, and worse, it might bring the zombies out in greater numbers. They would have to make camp, but it wasn't an easy decision. "We rest, but we stay alert," Jake said firmly. No fires, no noise. As night fell, the group huddled in the makeshift shelter they'd constructed, using the remnants of an abandoned farmhouse as cover. The wind howled outside, shaking the walls and making the roof creak. The storm was close now. The first cracks of thunder reverberated through the land, and with it came the growing sense of impending doom. Eli sat by the door, his eyes scanning the pitch-black night through the tiny gaps in the boarded-up windows. His fingers gripped the handle of his rifle, and he forced himself to focus on the sounds of the storm rather than the haunting memories of his past. He couldn't afford to be distracted. "Not now. There's something out there," he muttered under his breath, his voice tight. Jake looked up from the map. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Eli said, his eyes narrowing. "I just feel it. Something's not right." Dr. Carter glanced nervously at the door. "We need to focus on the storm. If we don't keep moving, the weather will slow us down and make us vulnerable." The storm was intensifying, the howling winds mixing with the low rumble of thunder. Outside, the world seemed to be coming apart at the seams. But it wasn't the storm that kept everyone on edge. It was the creeping suspicion that they weren't alone. It was then that they heard it, a faint shuffle, barely audible over the storm's roar, but unmistakable in its meaning. Something was moving outside. Jake's hand immediately shot to his sidearm. "Everyone stay down," he hissed. "Get your weapons ready." The group dropped to their knees, staying low to the ground as they tried to peer through the cracks in the walls. The noise grew louder. It wasn't just one zombie. It sounded like more than one. The storm outside began to howl even louder, almost as if it were masking the footsteps. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. Eli strained his ears, trying to listen. His heart pounded in his chest. "There's something moving out there," he whispered again. "But it's not like the usual zombies." They're moving in patterns, almost like they're hunting. A chill ran through the group. The concept of zombies becoming more coordinated wasn't new. Dr. Carter had warned them that the undead were evolving, but hearing it described like this made it feel more real than ever. "I don't like this," Emily muttered. "They're adapting. If they're learning to hunt, we need to move." Jake looked toward the group, his face tense with uncertainty. "We can't risk heading out in the middle of the night. We're safer here for now. But stay alert. If they're out there, they'll make their move soon." Minutes stretched into hours as the group huddled together in silence, the storm outside masking every sound but the deafening thunder. No one slept. Their nerves were raw, and each survivor's mind raced with the implications of the new threat they faced. The world they had known, one where survival was a matter of outlasting the zombies, was no longer valid. Now it seemed like humanity was at war with an enemy that could think, plan, and adapt. Just before dawn, the noises outside grew faint, and the storm began to die down. The wind slowed, and the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. But no one dared to relax. They knew the zombies had learned to wait. And if they had learned to wait, they had learned to strike with deadly precision. Jake stood up and motioned for the others to follow. "We move now. We'll get as far as we can before the storm catches us again. Keep your eyes open, and don't trust anything that looks like it's standing still." They packed their gear quickly and cautiously stepped outside. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with tension. The group moved as quietly as possible, their footsteps muffled by the wet earth. As they made their way toward the mountains, the unsettling thought loomed over them. The zombies were learning, and whatever this new evolution was, it would be waiting for them in the shadows. The real battle was just beginning. The world around them had transformed into an alien landscape, where every twisted tree and every pile of rubble could hide an enemy. As the survivors trudged through the post-apocalyptic wilderness, the sense of unease grew. They had been moving for hours now, the first light of dawn casting a faint glow on the craggy hills ahead. The storm had passed, but the strange feeling of being hunted hadn't lifted. Captain Jake Harrison led the group, his eyes scanning the environment, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig making him flinch. The memories of the creatures they had faced in the past few days, their newfound intelligence, lingered in his mind. Zombies that hunted like predators? It didn't sit right with him. It was as if they were no longer just an undead horde. They were becoming something else entirely. More dangerous, more coordinated. "We need to keep moving," Jake said, his voice low and tense. "No more stops unless it's absolutely necessary." Eli Thompson, who had been quietly walking behind the others, suddenly paused, his gaze locked on a distant shadow. It was a momentary flash, nothing more than the movement of a silhouette. His breath caught in his throat, and his grip tightened around his rifle. "Jake, I think we're not alone." Again, the others halted. Silence fell like a heavy curtain, and the wind seemed to die down. Every survivor knew that something was off. Jake's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. "Everyone, spread out. Stay low and keep your distance." The group fanned out, moving cautiously in all directions, their senses heightened by the ever-present fear that something unseen was watching them. For several long minutes, there was nothing. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the faint crackling of distant thunder. But just as the tension began to settle, Emily Carter let out a quiet gasp. It's a trap," she whispered. "Look." The others turned to follow her gaze. Up ahead, near a dilapidated cabin, was a mass of twisted bodies piled high. The unmistakable shape of zombies lay tangled together in an unholy heap. But this was different. It wasn't just a random gathering of corpses. It was a carefully arranged pile. The zombies had been deliberately stacked like some grotesque monument. Jake's gut churned. "That's no accident," he said, his voice edged with dread. "They've set it up. They're watching us, testing us." Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the trees. It wasn't the usual mindless moan of a lone zombie. This was a coordinated call, a signal. Jake's heart raced as the growl was answered by several more, each one from a different direction. They were surrounded. Without a word, Jake motioned for the group to fall back to the cabin, seeking the last bit of cover they could find. As they moved, the sounds grew louder closer. The zombies weren't stumbling mindlessly through the woods. They were stalking, hunting, as if they knew exactly where the survivors were headed. Emily's face was pale as she caught up with Jake. They're organizing. This isn't just a few random undead. It's like they're being led by something. They're hunting us. I know, Jake muttered, his mind racing. The mutation, it's more advanced than we thought. They're evolving faster than we can keep up with. The growls grew more intense. The undead were closing in. With no time to waste, Jake motioned for the group to push into the cabin for shelter. It was a narrow escape as they dove through the doorway, slamming the door behind them. Inside, the survivors took a breath, listening to the pounding of the rain and the storm outside. The once dilapidated cabin had seen better days, but it would have to serve as their temporary haven. Eli wiped the sweat from his forehead, his voice tense. What the hell is going on, Jake? These things aren't just aimless anymore. They've got a purpose. They're learning, Jake said, pacing the small room. And if we don't figure out what they want, we're going to end up part of their plan. Emily stepped forward. I've been researching the virus, and the mutations are accelerating. If we're right, they formed a kind of collective intelligence, like a hive mind. There's a leader, someone or something directing them. If we find the source of that leader, we might have a chance to take them down. But where do we even begin? Eli asked. We're a day's walk from Rockies, and the whole world's against US. Zombies that think. This is something new. We need information, Jake said, his mind already working. We're close to the Rockies. There's a research facility up ahead, before the mountains turn into sheer cliffs. If we can get there, we might find answers. It could be our best shot. Dr. Carter nodded slowly. I've heard of the facility, but it's not exactly a safe zone. It's been a military research lab. They were studying the virus. If anyone has the answers, it's there. Jake looked around at the survivors, his gaze steady. We leave at first light. This is our only chance. We go for the lab, and we figure out what the hell's going on before it's too late. The group nodded in agreement, but even as they spoke, they could hear it, the faint shuffle of footsteps outside the cabin. They were close, too close. Jake grabbed his rifle and gestured for the others to do the same. We need to move. Now, just as they prepared to leave, a soft knock came at the cabin door. Everyone froze. The knock was deliberate, slow, calculated. Eli's hand tightened around his weapon. What the hell? Jake motioned for silence. Stay quiet. The knock came again, this time louder, more urgent. The others exchanged uneasy glances, their nerves stretched taut. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side knew they were inside. And it wasn't just the zombies. There was something more, something worse. The knock wasn't from the dead. The enemy had found them. The cabin was suffocating in its silence. The knock on the door reverberated through the fragile wooden structure, each tap feeling like a death sentence. The survivors froze, their breath shallow, every instinct screaming at them to run. But Jake held them still, his eyes locked onto the door as if trying to read the unseen threat beyond it. His grip tightened on his rifle. Stay quiet, Jake whispered, his voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly would break the fragile barrier between them and the danger lurking outside. No one makes a sound. We wait. But the waiting was agonizing. The knock had been deliberate, slow, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side was testing them, trying to see how they would react. It was too calculated to be a random encounter with the undead. The group exchanged nervous glances, the weight of the moment pressing on them like a physical force. Dr. Emily Carter was the first to break the silence. Jake, we can't just sit here. We have to figure out who's out there. Jake shook his head, his eyes never leaving the door. If we move now, we risk being caught off guard. We stay put. We're not taking unnecessary risks. But the knock came again, this time louder and more forceful. There was no mistaking it. Someone or something was on the other side of the door, waiting for them to make a move. Eli moved cautiously to the back of the room, his rifle held low, but ready. His nerves were stretched to the breaking point, and his mind raced with possibilities. Was it another group of survivors? Or was it something worse, something they hadn't seen before? The zombies had already evolved into something more dangerous. Could this be a new threat altogether? Jake's voice was a low growl. Get back. All of you. If that door opens, we need to be ready for anything. The survivors positioned themselves carefully in the room, weapons aimed at the door, eyes darting around for any potential escape routes. Every creak of the building's timbers felt like a warning. The storm outside had died down, but inside the cabin, the air was thick with tension, each heartbeat a countdown to an unknown confrontation. Then, there was a sudden sound that made every nerve in the room snap tight. It wasn't a knock this time, it was a voice. Low, almost hypnotic. A whisper, just audible through the door. I know you're in there. The voice was smooth, calm, too calm. It was as though whoever was outside knew exactly who they were. The chill that ran down Jake's spine was immediate. He motioned for the group to hold their fire, his gaze flicking between the door and the windows. They had no idea who this was. Were they friend or foe? A human survivor? A trick? Or something worse? A slow, deliberate pause followed. The voice came again, quieter, but even more unnerving. You can't hide. I've been watching you. You don't have much time. Jake's pulse quickened. This wasn't some random survivor trying to barter for supplies. Whoever this was, they were dangerous, and they had been following them for far longer than they realized. Who the hell are you? Jake demanded, his voice steady but his heart racing. The response was chilling. You'll find out soon enough. You're not safe here. Not from them, not from me. You're being hunted. The voice paused, as if savoring the words. And you don't even know why. The door rattled, as if something or someone was testing it. The cabin seemed to tremble under the pressure of whatever force was behind it. The survivors gripped their weapons tighter. They couldn't just wait here forever. They had no idea who or what was outside. But whatever it was, it knew them. Knew they were out here. Knew they were vulnerable. Jake motioned for the group to move to the back of the cabin. We're not waiting to be ambushed. We're going out the back. But just as they turned, a sound like a mechanical click echoed through the cabin. The front door was being forced open. The survivors whipped around, all eyes wide in panic. But before anyone could act, the door flew inward with a crash. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. There, in the doorway, stood a figure. Tall, dark, and imposing. They were covered in mud and dirt, their clothes ragged. But it wasn't just their appearance that was unnerving. It was the way they stood. The presence they commanded. It was as if they had already claimed the space, as if they had already won. The figure stepped forward, their eyes scanning the room with unsettling precision. They wore a mask, a dark, featureless piece of cloth that obscured their face completely. But there was no mistaking the energy surrounding them. This person, this thing, was not just a survivor. They were something different. We need to talk, the figure said, their voice low and steady. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a threat. It was a command. You've come too far to turn back now. Jake instinctively raised his rifle, but the figure's presence froze him in place. It wasn't just their tone. It was the way they held themselves, the sheer confidence that they had the upper hand. Who are you? Jake demanded again, his finger twitching on the trigger. The figure tilted their head slightly, as if considering Jake's question. I am the one who's been following you, they said, their voice soft but carrying an edge of something ancient. I've seen the things you faced, the things that hunt you. But the real enemy, the real danger, it's not just out there. It's within you. You're carrying it right now. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Jake's mind raced. What did this figure mean? What were they implying? We are not the enemy, Jake said slowly, his rifle still aimed at the figure. We're trying to stop the zombies, to stop the virus. The figure's head cocked again, their body language suggesting amusement, or maybe pity. You don't understand. You're not just fighting the infected. There's something more, something darker behind all of this. The figure's eyes never left Jake. It's time you learned the truth. You're not being hunted by zombies. You're being hunted by something far worse. The room was heavy with silence as the figure stepped forward again, their movement deliberate. The survivors instinctively backed away, but Jake held his ground, his rifle unwavering. The true battle for humanity's survival had just begun. The air inside the cabin felt colder, despite the lingering warmth from the storm outside. The figure stood in the doorway, like a shadow come to life, its mask hiding any trace of emotion. The survivors were on edge, their hands twitching toward their weapons. But Jake, ever the leader, held them back with a single, sharp motion. This figure wasn't a mindless zombie. They were something else, something dangerous in a way they hadn't yet fully understood. "I don't have time for your games," Jake said, his voice low and steady, but the weight of the moment was clear. The figure hadn't flinched at the threat in Jake's tone, and that unnerved him more than anything. "What do you want from us?" The figure's head tilted, almost as if in amusement. "What do I want? I want you to survive, or at least to understand what's coming." The survivors exchanged wary glances, and Emily took a cautious step forward. "We're already surviving," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We're not interested in any more mysteries. We've seen enough horror to last 10 lifetimes. But we've also seen a way to fight back, the research facility in the Rockies. We need to get there before it's too late." The figure's voice was soft, but held an undeniable weight. "You think the facility will save you?" They chuckled darkly, the sound a dissonant note in the heavy silence. "You've seen what they've done to the infected, but you're not ready for the truth of what's behind all of this." Jake narrowed his eyes, his fingers still on the trigger, but his mind racing. "Who are you? And what's your game?" The figure stepped into the cabin, their presence filling the small room. They spoke in a slow, deliberate manner, the cadence of their voice sending a chill down the spine of everyone present. "I am a remnant of what was, before the virus. I'm someone who saw what was coming. And when the world fell, I did what was necessary to survive." The figure paused, looking each survivor in the eye. "You think the zombies are the problem, but they're only the symptom. The true disease, it's not just in their blood. It's in all of us." The words hung in the air like an unspoken curse. The survivors recoiled at the implication. What did this person mean? Had the virus infected more than just the dead? Was it something even worse than they could imagine? Emily spoke up, her voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and fear. "What are you talking about? What do you mean the disease is in all of us?" The figure looked down, their body still a stone. "The virus, the mutation, it didn't just make them zombies. It altered the very fabric of life. Those of us who survived the initial outbreak, we were changed too. You feel it, don't you? The way you're constantly on edge, the way your instincts are heightened. It's not just from fear. The virus is in you, as it is in me." Jake felt a cold sweat prickling at the back of his neck. He had always known that the infection was more than just a simple plague. It had to be. The way the undead had started to change, to adapt, was proof enough. But this? The thought that the virus could be inside of them, that it could be influencing their every decision, every move, it made his blood run cold. "Why didn't you tell us this sooner?" Jake demanded, the words coming out harsher than he intended. "You could have helped us. We've been fighting blindly." The figure shook their head. "I've been trying to help. But you don't understand. You haven't seen the bigger picture. You're not the only ones fighting the infection. There's a group of us, those who are trying to harness the virus, to control it. And they've been watching you. They're using you to bring about the next phase of evolution." Eli's eyes widened. "You mean there's another group of survivors out there? Another faction?" The figure nodded slowly. "They've been tracking you since you left the city. They've been manipulating your movements, guiding you toward the research facility. But what you don't know is that the lab isn't just a place of research, it's a holding ground. They're waiting for the survivors to arrive, waiting for the moment when they can test the next stage of the virus." Jake's mind raced as he processed the information. And what happens when we get there? What are they going to do to us? They'll use you, the figure replied, their voice colder now, full of grim finality. They'll use your bodies for experiments. You're the key to unlocking the next step in human evolution. The virus doesn't just kill, it transforms. And they're looking for the right subjects to test their theories. Emily shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. So, you're saying we're just pawns? In someone else's game? The figure's mask tilted slightly, as if acknowledging her pain. We all are. But not everyone knows it. Not everyone feels it. But you've seen it. You felt it in your bones. You're not just fighting to survive anymore. You're fighting to control what happens next. There was a long silence, the weight of the figure's words settling over the group like a heavy fog. Jake's mind was spinning, trying to grasp the enormity of what they had just been told. But there was no time to dwell on it. Not now. The storm outside was still raging, and their time was running out. We can't afford to wait any longer, Jake said, his voice firm. If we don't get to the facility, they're going to use the virus on us. We need to find a way to stop them before it's too late. The figure remained unmoving, their mask obscuring any sign of emotion. It's already too late, they said softly. The virus is already inside you. It's already changing you. You can't stop it now. The only thing left to do is embrace it. Jake's heart pounded as he stared at the figure. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for control of their own destinies. And in the end, they would have to face the dark truth of what they had become and what they were about to become. We'll see about that, Jake said, his voice a low growl. He turned to the group. We're heading to the research facility. If we're going to end this, we do it on our terms. And with that, the survivors turned toward the unknown, their steps heavy with the weight of their choices, as the door slammed shut behind them. The final battle had begun.